in Russia. And it is what is also now clear in European countries is that the role of the state is massively increasing. Hence, we should be clear, our enemy is not only neoliberalism, but equally also the other forms of capitalist state. And it's important in this, in such a period that we do not direct the struggle only against the forms of neoliberalism, but also against all forms of state capitalism. Because state capitalism also massively oppresses the working class and the popular masses. I finish with this now, for now.
Right, okay, thank you for that very comprehensive explanation of neoliberalism. Please mute your mic. Andrew.
Yes.
Please mute your mic. Karibu, lakini tafadhali mute your mic. All right. Gasheke, if you'd like to add to what Michael has said, if you have a simpler definition of neoliberalism, and especially in the Kenyan context, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was very, very, very powerful, and especially clarifying that we have different versions of capitalism. That's we are facing now increasing state capitalism. Here in Kenya, as you have said very well, we are having a serious challenge because the Jubilee regime is now militarizing everything. The military is back in the democratic spaces. We are facing a lot of extrajudicial killings, police brutality. All these are connected with the challenges of the neoliberalism. And I think COVID-19, as you have said, has given us a very clear manifestation of how a crisis of capitalism can be violent. In the last 6 months, we have been facing a lot of police brutality, extrajudicial killings, and the worst of this is that this COVID-19 is a crisis of healthcare. But what has happened is our state has criminalized the healthcare crisis. You have a problem wearing a mask, it has become a criminal act not to wear a mask, and that is a healthcare issue which has been criminalized. So we are facing a major challenge, and it is very, very important that you have said we should not only discuss about the crisis of neoliberalism, we should start asking ourselves, what is the strategy and the strategy to move this struggle forward, the struggle for liberation. And I'm very happy that Simon Bolivar and Chavez Cente are here because is Hugo Chavez in early 1999, 2001, warned the world that the future will be very bleak if we don't rethink about this model of economy of neoliberalism. And I remember him reading a book by Noam Chomsky in the United Nations and talking about the US empire, which was going everywhere, creating chaos and wars. So what is very important for us to understand, and Lenin said about this, that if capitalism cannot resolve its contradiction, if capitalism and imperialism cannot resolve its contradiction, what happened? It invites us to fascism. This is happening in Europe. We have far-right organizations that are criminalizing people, attacking a minority. We know what happened with George Floyd. This is the manifestation of neoliberalism, state capitalism with violence. Here in Africa, we are finding dictatorship also staying in power for a long time. Tanzania also, there are comrades from Tanzania, from Julawata here. They are facing crisis of neoliberal elections where the state is using a state instrument of violence to suppress opposition. The same opposition in many countries also is being supported by right-wing organizations also in Europe. So we are facing a major crisis. And I think as a progressive forces, we need to think about how to come together and unify our forces. We are facing also challenges also here in Kenya, the fragmentation of the left. So I'm very happy that the Revolutionary Socialist League have convened this webinar and also Thomas Sankara Political School. One important thing we need to think is how to build a powerful base that is united. We need to think about bringing all progressive forces in Kenya together so that we can be able to unify with the struggles in Africa and also internationally. But I appreciate greatly the intervention from Michael on why we need to think not about neoliberalism, but how the state capitalism, fascism is shaping up during this COVID-19 crisis. Thank you very much, Maureen.
All right, thank you very much. I think the theme here is international solidarity against neoliberalism. So I'd like to ask Comrade Sobukwe, to talk about neoliberalism in America and especially to how it affects the African diaspora, because he is a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So Comrade Sobukwe, please let us know how neoliberalism has affected Black people in the US, especially because they've been the biggest victims of COVID-19 in the US, and how is this related to neoliberalism?
Well, I would like to start with the question of neoliberalism as actually being more of a tool of imperialism. It is grows out of the concentration of wealth and the need to control the resources at a different level. One of the questions of neoliberalism in terms of, because it's not the same manifestation inside of a settler state like the US as it is in Africa. Neoliberalism was used and founded to make sure that the capitalist state, the capitalist and imperialists were able to continue control and to spread their control of those countries who had emerged from colonization and had started to try to build their own economies. So we have neoliberalism, and it was about being able to use force to take over, even privatize the very social institutions in countries abroad from the Western and US corporations. So now they were able through neoliberal policies to make new kinds of trade agreements and force their way to be able to take over things like the management of water, things like healthcare, things like even militaries on foreign soils, to take over the everyday activity that should be run by the people's state, or the state is responsible for, take for instance, the privatization of water in South Africa during the 90s led to an outbreak of cholera because people could not afford water. Private companies would not give water freely, and certainly people were forced to drink water out of the rivers, which led to a big cholera epidemic. So neoliberalism forces upon countries and lessens their right to self-determination. These are the Western companies, the Western governments colluding with the capitalist corporations to make sure that they are able to dominate the everyday, daily activities inside of countries. Now, what COVID-19 did for us was to expose the crisis of neoliberalism and the crisis of capitalism. As you know, after the crisis of 2007 and 2008, when there was a major crisis in real estate and property in the US and the Western Europe and the world in terms of investments, the answer to that in the 70s, 2007, 2008, was to take to recoup the losses of the capitalist institutions, the banks and so on, by creating what they called austerity methods or austerity policies. These policies said, we will take, recoup our money by reducing the amount of social programs in these countries. So we see in Europe a cutback in medical care, and educational care, and benefits for the workers. We see in the United States a cutback in social services, a cutback in the things that were supporting the lives of people who were on the margins of poverty. This is what we saw across the world, forcing countries in Africa and Asia and in Central and Latin America to do the same. And this is what caused the crisis that now created a crisis that when COVID-19 comes along, you see in the United States, which we would have thought was the most developed country in the world, you see that now they cannot provide enough hospital beds. They cannot provide enough health care. They cannot provide enough support for those who are forced out of employment during the pandemic. They cannot protect the workers who must work for people to survive, those who they call the frontline workers. They cannot take care of them. So the crisis is, of course, that the frontline workers, of course, come from the most marginalized people in the society. So we see the African populations, the descendants of Africa in the United States. You see the descendants of indigenous people in the United States. You see the people who are working class in the United States taking the brunt of this COVID-19. They are forced to work, or they're either forced to work as frontline workers, or they are not receiving the benefits that would help them survive during this period. So many of them are, of course, with marginalized healthcare, if healthcare at all. And so when they go to their hospitals, which are the hospitals that are again, without many resources and not supported by the state, they find themselves in dire straits in terms of surviving COVID-19. And already, many of them are also the ones who because of the lack of healthcare prior to it, the effects of neoliberalism before, the effects of cutting back the austerity methods, had already neglected their healthcare in terms of basic things like diabetes, basic things like being overweight and things like that, and having already pre-existing problems that had not been addressed. They found themselves even more vulnerable to COVID-19. So it was killing them on a very basic level. Neoliberalism also supports the kinds of programs that allow for the militarization of the planet, the further militarization of the planet. So we see cooperation with the most settler, imperialist, and neo-colonial forces uniting to be ready for any resistance against the austerity methods and neoliberal methods and the neo-colonial aspects. So they're preparing, they're plotting together. So that's why they're AFRICOM, the African Command and Stuttgart, Germany, is used again to make sure that the neo-colonial states that cooperate with neoliberalism are fortified, that they can, that the U.S. actually can give them military support, as well as being able to use those forces to overthrow all forces that are counter to their interests. And so we see this kind of militarization, the increased military bases in the Central and South America. We see the increased military presence in Asia. We see the increased military presence across the globe to defend neoliberalism. And so that effect also, we see it even in the local police. We see the Zionist forces out of Israel, occupied Palestine, also using their forces to come train forces on the ground, police forces on the ground in the United States to make them even more vicious against the struggle of the masses against it. But I do want to say, all of this has also shown us the other side and has invigorated the other side. We see the mass resistance against this police brutality and militarization in the United States. You see more interaction between the masses of the people who see through the lens of the U.S. can see that this militarization, this police brutality, this prison industrial complex is a weapon of neoliberalism, and the people are pushing back. This period has also shown us what cooperation can be. The cooperation, when we see the forces in Cuba and the forces around the world who have collaborated and cooperated and sending doctors to help to fend off the crisis of COVID-19. Doctors from Cuba going around the world and offering their medical expertise to help reduce cases. We see strategies coming out of China even in terms of medical assistance to other countries. So we can see that this crisis has revealed both the crisis that comes with the use of these crises to do more oppression, but it is also, as I say, has also revealed our strength, our possibilities, our what can happen if we pull together more and struggle together more, and that we don't just use this process for mobilization in terms of mobilizing for a few events and pushing back against the enemy, but we organize on a permanent basis to move forward and to struggle more collectively and more organized in our resistance to neoliberalism and capitalism in general and all forms of imperialism. I'll stop there. Sorry if I take long.
All right, thank you very much, Comrade Sobukwe. And just as you said, the pandemic has radicalized all of us, and this is our opportunity to organize towards the overthrow of capitalism and neoliberalism. So thank you very much for that. And just before we move on, I'd like the representative of the Bolivar and Chavez, please mute your mics, Gasheke. Please mute your mics. So I'd like the representative from Venezuela to please say something about how neoliberalism has perhaps manifested in Venezuela. Bolivar and Chavez Center. Yes, thank you.
Hi, comrades. Thanks so much. I'm really sorry, but my English is so bad, and I think I can't speak too much. So I just want to say thanks for the opportunity to listen to you and to share, but I can't speak too much because my English is not good. I'm sorry.
All right, thank you. We have received the solidarity message from the Venezuelan embassy, so that will have to do. So thank you very much for being here with us. Okay, so Comrade Michael has posted some important reading material in the chat box, if everyone could have a look at that. Thank you so much, Comrade Michael. And so I'd like to call out on people attending the webinar if they have questions to fill to the panelists, or if they have something to add to this conversation, the crisis of neoliberalism in the age of COVID-19. Does anyone want to go? Comrade Zarina Patel.
Hello, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you everyone, and thank you very much for all those very interesting and informative insights. I guess I could add my particular concern, which is how neoliberalism is affecting women as such. After all, women are half, if not more, than the population. And what we are seeing a real onslaught on all the gains that women have made over the years, struggling to liberate themselves. And right now here in Kenya, on our doorstep is the problem of the 2/3 gender rule, which is being massively by the state. And so that is one. We've seen during the COVID period a huge increase in domestic violence and very little response to alleviate that. There is, of course, generally worldwide, a downplaying of the issue of differing sexual orientations. I think the LGBT community had made quite a tremendous gains, but are beginning to see an onslaught against them. In the US, it's very clear now when we look at the whole issue of the Supreme Court and the death of Justice Ginsburg, and now the attempt to bring in this other woman who is blatantly anti-abortionist and anti-abortion and very, very conservative indeed. Her appointment there is going to mean a bad future for the women's movement. The Me Too movement generally, also, we hardly hear about it now because it has faced enormous obstacles. And it seems to be an attempt. It has happened in the past, but it's getting worse. It is again surfacing. Is this division that is being perpetrated of Western feminists, and now we've got Afro-feminists, and it's dividing the women's movement. And instead of bringing people together, it's creating different categories again and putting one against the other. In South Africa, there's a huge rise in the femicide cases, attacks on women, rape, etc. And then, of course, there is the right-wing onslaught in Hungary, in Poland, well, you name it, everywhere, in the US and everywhere. So my concern really is that we need also to look very carefully at what is happening to women. Women are half the population. Women are the, what shall I call them? The filler of capitalism, the family. They are the ones who keep the family going. They are the ones who produce the next generation. So their position in the whole scenario is of extreme importance. Thank you, I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Comrade Zarina, and I do agree with you that women have, been some of the biggest victims of the COVID-19 crisis. A few weeks ago, we witnessed a woman giving birth outside the gates of Pumwani Hospital. I mean, amid a pandemic, they were still asking her for insurance cards. They don't respect the sanctity of human life, even in such a time when we are facing a worldwide pandemic. So yes, I do agree that women have been some of the biggest victims of capitalism and neoliberalism, and it's manifesting itself during this pandemic. So Nasoro has joined in. Nasoro, if you could tell us, if you could introduce yourself and tell us which organization you're representing. Also, Marie, if you could introduce yourself and tell us which organization you're representing. Please mute your mics.
I couldn't get myself back to I went to chat and then.
Nasoro, if you are there. Okay, so Michael, thank you very much for all the reading material that you're providing. If everyone could please just check the chat box. Comrade Michael has posted some important reading material. If Comrade Oladipupo of Revolutionary Socialist Vanguard, he's supposed to be one of our panelists, is here, you could do your presentation. Comrade Oladipupo. Okay, so if Comrade Oladipupo is not here, if any of the comrades would like to fill their questions to the panelists, Suhayl Omar, would you like to make any comments on the crisis of neoliberalism during this pandemic? No one? Comrade Maganga?
Yes, thank you very much, Comrade Maureen. Thank you very much, all the people who've made presentations in this session. I think we have had a very, very comprehensive definition of exactly what neoliberalism is, and we have gotten a background or even how this policy of neoliberalism as part of capitalism in general came into being. I think that indeed during this pandemic, it has become even more apparent. We have seen how neoliberalism has manifested itself in various ways, and this has been mentioned, how healthcare is in total crisis, how the education system is in total crisis. In our own case, you can see how the policymakers of our country are in total, in total disregard to the parents, the teachers, and all stakeholders in the education sector. They're making decisions without including them. And we can see how much exclusion is manifested, even as students are required to attend online graduation ceremonies and online courses, and how other students, actually the majority of the students of the country cannot access this, and how this nonetheless is being forced upon the students without even taking these factors into consideration. We can see how inequality has manifested itself. We can see how state repression
nobody came back to us, so we just
very, very apparent during this period. And these are all manifestations of neoliberalism and capitalism in general.
Yes.
And this crisis has enabled us to basically see this in a very, very clear manner. Comrade Gashaki mentioned that when capitalism is in crisis, there are some possibilities.
Yes.
And one of these possibilities is fascism, which of course involves the hardening of the repressive state, the repressive nature of the state. And I think we can already see in one context and in other countries throughout the world how the right wing is basically strengthening and trying to roll back the gains of the struggles of the people. But also we can see how the people have been rising up in revolt and in resistance. And the other possibility, of course, that arises is that the people are going to organize and be victorious and basically institute or rather put in place a system that seeks to solve the antagonistic nature of the contradictions that exist in the society. And that, of course, involves a socialist revolution. So I think that the tasks that we face, which I think is something that the panelists are going to be also talking about, is that we organize, we agitate, we take advantage of this situation and basically offer guidance and leadership to the masses, to the people, and basically work towards a socialist system in which these contradictions are solved, these antagonistic contradictions are solved. Thank you, comrade.
All right, asante sana Maganga for that analysis. So if Comrade Suhayl would like to give us approaches, like what approach would have been more appropriate in dealing with such a pandemic? Comrade Suhayl, if you could take it away.
Thank you so much, Maureen, and all the organizers for this platform. But just before I answer your question, I think there's a lot that has been mentioned, and we just also have to look at, we've seen the pandemic has brought a lot of radicalization of the youth and the growth of many movements and more people joining movements. But we've also seen neoliberalism putting this movement and the growth of the left all over the world in particular crisis, because we can see ourselves, even taking an example of what's happening in the US or what's even happening in Kenya, if we look at the movements that are growing and the radical youth or anyone or the Kenyan left growing, there's a lot of particular gatekeeping and hierarchies even within this movement. So even as we interrogate neoliberalism in the broader concept, we also have to look at it and introspect what's happening in our movements, in the left, larger left movement, and also the radical platform, because we've seen neoliberalism comes along and pacifies many abolitionist movements. It pacifies many radical ideologies. For example, in the abolitionist movement, we've seen where activists and grassroots organizers are now falling into the trap of reform rather than abolition. And even in Kenya, we're seeing this particular trend. We're seeing where movements of movements of social justice, movements of abolition, movements of radical change, and movements of like larger left movements falling into this particular form of reform. So maybe as we go on with the conversation, maybe we can also just look at the praxis of infiltration and how neoliberalism infiltrates left movements or radical movements to pacify them and make them very basic. So any small achievement or any small movement to the towards the goal makes it seem like a very broad achievement, seems like we've done such a good thing. And taking an example of politics, or rather than looking at the US politics, the fact that we have this person who seems as a progressive person coming into politics, and we're seeing all this like a majority or like a portion of the left going to vote for them, but still we have this, we're still fighting and revolting, or rather always protesting against this state of governance that we have, because we can't be voters in a system that has highly disenfranchised us, is a system that protects capitalism, and is a system that will only protect the elite and leave all the rest of us away. So I think also we need to look at how neoliberalism has infiltrated radical movements and pacified them to mean that even reform is now a radical act. That was just a suggestion on, or rather like a guide on how we can go on with the conversation. But Maureen, back to your question, I think even in Kenya, we've seen a lot that's happening. We've seen during the pandemic where we've seen organizers and activists taking root of mutual aid efforts, of community building, forming unions. So I think even with the pandemic, we have to disregard this authoritarian rule of the Kenyatta regime, especially in Kenya, because a lot of things have been happening, and they've been happening because we're in a capitalist state. So for example, in the first 100 days of Kenya's lockdown and curfew, we had seen numerous deaths. We had seen people either fighting hunger in their homes or fighting the police outside their homes. So there was no ground that someone could stand and say, I am being supported by the state. But during this time, we had seen an active rise with the social justice movements and their campaigns in fighting police brutality. We had seen particular social justice centers had started providing food to their communities, picking up from certain Black Panther principles, certain Mau Mau principles of community building and unionizing. And we've seen also particular growth of intersectional activism in Kenya, which is slowly growing. We've seen achievements where movements are now openly supporting and fighting for equity for both genders, and also accepting anyone in the Soji community. We've seen people coming from all walks of life coming together to form unions, coming out to protests. And I think another issue also of neoliberalism comes up is we need to understand what are the practicalities of you being a radical person, because as we go on, we've seen this movement setting certain hierarchies that you can't be a radical person because, or you can't participate in radical politics because you're from this background, because you're from this, you've done this. So I think we also need to understand how together we can move away from this particular neoliberalism, not just as a manifestation of capitalism, but also as an infiltration towards our movements and the larger left movement. I think I've digressed a bit, but I hope I've answered your question, Maureen.
Yes, asante sana Suhayl for that. And like you said, neoliberalism is more than, just a manifestation of capitalism. It's very nuanced. It goes deeper than just economic determinism. And I love all the work that you've listed of people in the grassroots machinery, the work that they've done to combat liberalism at this time. So Comrade Gasheke, I've seen you raising your hand and you're a panelist, so I'm going to field the same question to you. Like, what approach would have been more appropriate in dealing with such a pandemic? And I know that you work with a lot of grassroots organization in some of the most marginalized neighborhoods in Nairobi. So what approach did the social justice centers take to combat neoliberalism during this time? And what are you doing to ease the suffering of people in the grassroots? Comrade Gasheke, please take it away.
Thank you, Maureen. First of all, comrades have raised about the challenges we are facing. Suhayl has spoken about the extensive work that social justice have done, especially documenting cases of human rights violation due to COVID-19 crisis. And really, comrades spoke very strongly, especially Sobukwe and Mike. They have talked about this COVID-19, what it did, it exposed the limitation of the capitalism and challenges that capitalism is facing, whether it's in North America, Europe, China, all these really expose the crisis we are facing with the capitalism. And when Sobukwe speak about the right to health care, water, crisis of water in South Africa, even before the COVID-19 came in, we had these challenges in Kenya, informal settlement in Mathare, Dandora, all these places. There is no water, there is no sewage system. People are just living in shacks. So even before COVID-19 came, already people were really struggling for the basics. So what we can say, unless we do what Suhayl was talking about, charity with mutual aid, just giving people food there and there, especially those activists who were in front line. But we didn't have a substantial intervention, what we would call a subsistence way of sustaining resistance against onslaught on COVID-19, on a crisis of food, healthcare, things like that. I think what we need to learn is what many movements have done, especially in Latin America, where people like MST, occupying lands. This we have not done in Kenya. The bourgeois in Kenya control land, and land means a lot for people. I think people are starving in informal settlement in Nairobi, a crisis of unemployment, 1,000 of young people from university now, they don't have jobs. So we are having double exploitation. We're having poverty, unemployment, no income, and the same thing, there's the crisis of COVID-19. So I think, how do we move forward? And this is a fundamental question if we want to move away from NGOization. I hear Suhayl is talking more about gatekeeping and, hello, I'm still there, Maureen. Am I still there? Hello?
Yes, yes.
I can continue?
Yes.
So as I say, Comrade Suhayl is talking about the hierarchy and these challenges that we are facing. First of all, we have to accept what we are doing in a social justice center. It's not revolutionary. Those are reform spaces, civic spaces, and my comrades from Thomas Sankara's political school, they will talk about it. These are reform spaces. We are using a lot of languages of human rights discourse, documenting these cases, but the nature of our politics in Kenya. Zarina Patel can talk about that, the history of reform movement in Kenya, which is led by middle class. Majority of them are lawyers, using legal issues, a liberal democratic constitution to champion human rights. This is the space we are, and we are really encouraged by Revolutionary Socialist League, because they have been doing great work, and especially sharpening contradiction in these spaces, making sure that we are doing political education, and especially class analysis, because that is what we have been missing. If you have a clear class analysis, you can be able to illuminate the challenges they are facing. You will see the limitation of social justice center. You will start understanding we need to build a broader, progressive, revolutionary political instrument that can harvest these grievances. That's why we do Sabasaba March for Life, honor. We protested in this year. We did protest against human rights violation. That's very great as a part of pushing a shrinking democratic space. But we need to think broader about major intervention, like what's happening in Brazil with the MST movement that are occupying land. And also in South Africa, they are trying this, because at the end of the day, we cannot sustain this kind of urban struggle without having food, water, healthcare. And all this can happen when people are be able to access land. Because as we move, recently you see in the newspaper, Kenya government has printed money, 15 billion, just to cover the holes that is coming with the COVID-19 crisis. And this crisis will continue, because at the end of the day, there is no future. The capitalism crisis has reached its limit. And this warning came from Chavez and many comrades in Latin America, warned us in early 2000 that as we continue with this neoliberal model of economy, it will attack our livelihoods. In Europe now, we don't have strong trade unions. Scandinavian countries, they have a major crisis. You saw what happened in Jeremy Corbyn in UK. He was defeated by the fascism of Boris Johnson. So this right wing will start continuing emerging and becoming strong. And what we need to think is how can we strengthen our social justice movement linked with the revolutionary vanguard platform like ourselves, and also thinking also instrument of political party. I don't know what people think about contesting a bourgeois election. That's another question that we have not spoken about. Also, we need to learn in other areas where people are consolidating movements and building it strongly so that they can be able to provide an alternative political leadership from below. But I think it's very important to understand what are the limitations of the reform movement. That we have not interrogated. And many people are mesmerized by these platforms. They think they really struggle. No, we need to think strongly about building strong revolutionary structures in the grassroots. And I think RSL as a revolutionary vanguard, they are shown us a path. And I think we need to continue. But what we need to think more is about economic model, how people can get livelihoods. Even in urban center, we need also to think, and this criticism also comes from RSL, we need to think on how people can own up car wash bases. Instead of buying food, we need to think about a small cooperative where we can create our own food, urban farming. Those are ideas, rehabilitating rivers and creating our own food. Those are things that we need to think about, because I think at the end of the day, this crisis cannot be sustained by neoliberalism resources that we get from George Soros and many other forces. And I think seen my comrade from Tanzania, Nasoro Kitunda, who say it is called a struggle and survival. Where we are struggling, we should see how we survive from that place so that we can be able to overcome this crisis we are facing. And this struggle is local, it's national and international. So we need to link up with the progressive forces and also learn from the Bolivarian revolution, Latin America, how they are struggling to make sure that they continue with the offensive against capitalism.
All right, asante sana Gasheke. Yes, we really need radical organizing, and we cannot depend on neoliberal tactics to survive this pandemic. We cannot depend on these NGOs. So, Comrade Michael, you had posted something on, just a minute. Comrade Michael, if you'd like to talk about radical activities that us as leftist socialist communists can engage in during the age of COVID-19. So nothing reformist, this is all about abolition. So Comrade Michael, if you'd like to talk about that.
Thanks a lot, Comrade Maureen. Look, I think it's a widespread misunderstanding to imagine that the struggle for reforms in itself would be something reformist, and that the struggle for a revolutionary overthrow must not care about reforms. This is wrong. A consistent struggle for socialist revolution in order to overthrow capitalist domination will always and must always include a struggle for reforms, or even a struggle against attacks which would reduce our social and democratic rights. The difference between a revolutionary approach in a struggle for reforms and a reformist approach to the struggle of reforms is the following. For a revolutionary, for a Marxist, the struggle for reform is important, but not a goal in itself, which must be viewed in isolation. No, the struggle for reform must be viewed in a context of a long-term revolutionary strategy. We must be aware that if we achieve this or that reform, if we hold a capitalist attack on this or that right, it is important because it helps us to survive until tomorrow. But it is only a temporary achievement. It is an illusion to establish, to believe that it is possible to establish a kind of social reformed capitalism. This is not possible. Therefore, the most important point of view, the most important criteria in approaching the struggle for reforms, for a revolutionary, is how much does such a struggle for this or that reform help us to increase the revolutionary consciousness of the vanguard, of the popular masses? How much does the struggle for this or that reform helps the masses to increase its self-organization so that it becomes a more combative, stronger, more militant force, so that it can better organize for defeating the capitalist domination? So I think we must not view the struggle for reforms and the struggle for revolution as something counterposed, but something which is connected with each other. Allow me to add in this context that we must be aware that COVID-19 has been utilized by the ruling classes as a pretext, as an excuse for a number of attacks. The ruling classes claim that the current world economic crisis is because of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is wrong. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated, has deepened the crisis, but this depression of the capitalist world economy started already in late 2019, long before anyone talked about COVID-19. We have elaborated this in a number of analyses of the world economy, and if comrades are interested, I can forward it to them. Secondly, it is clear COVID-19 is a serious pandemic. It is not a hoax, as the idiots like Trump claim. But on the other hand, we must also not imagine that COVID-19 is the worst pandemic ever and everyone is now dying, etc., etc. This is simply wrong. One can see that, for example, if you look at countries like Sweden, the mortality rate is not where you have no lockdown. You can see the mortality rate is not higher than it was in the past 20, 30 years. It is clear that, for example, I mean, the World Health Organization has said that every year, in average, 650,000 people die by influenza. So we have to see the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, in proportion to other pandemics. And there have been various pandemics in the past, starting from the so-called Hong Kong flu, the so-called Asia flu, HIV, AIDS, etc., etc. TBC, in India, more people are dying because of TBC than because of COVID-19. So we have to see things in relation. And what is clear now is that the lockdown policy, the policy of repression by the state, does not help in any way to overcome COVID-19. Look at France, look at Spain, look at Chile, look at all the countries which have imposed draconic lockdowns. They have the worst figures. They have the worst figures in people who are dying because of the pandemic. So the lockdown is not the answer. The answer can only be that we have an increase of the health system, a nationalization of the health system, international coordination in order to find and to create a vaccine against the coronavirus, free tests, free masks, etc., etc. Equally, we need an economic program, nationalizations of the corporations so that there are no more layoffs, no more sacking of workers, public employment program under the control of the workers so that people who have become unemployed can find a job. We need a democratic program, no against the surveillance state, no against the army on the streets, no against police violence. I think it's very important that various comrades have already pointed out that what we have seen in the last 6 months, 12 months is not only a crisis of capitalism, it's not only COVID-19 pandemic, but it's also a surge and a number of important popular uprisings, starting in various African countries, in Egypt, in Iraq, in Chile, the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States, in India, in various countries. So in fact, the people are ready to fight back. The problem is that people lack a program. People lack a revolutionary party in order to organize this struggle and to give it a perspective. And this is the task. This is the responsibility of revolutionary socialists. This is the responsibility of us. And I think it is important that we increase collaboration, that we join forces in order to fight back against the capitalist crisis so that we can overthrow capitalism via an international socialist revolution. Because there is no national answer to the capitalist crisis, there is only an international answer. And this answer is international socialism via world revolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Michael. I agree with you. There is no national answer. We need international solidarity for us to be able to fight neoliberalism. Comrade Anthony Adoyo from Sankara Political School, would you like to add something to what Comrade Michael has said? Anthony, take it away. Comrade Anthony, you had raised your hand. Is he gone now? All right, Comrade Monaja.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of what has been said, I think Michael has captured it well. I mean, the essence, yes, indeed, like, you know, we've faced a pandemic and people have been dying, but I think what's most important is what the pandemic has shown about the societies that we are living in. Like the inequalities, like the stark contradictions that we can see. And I think that was actually the point I was trying to prove when I was writing. There's a song Sikunjema. I was trying to show, like, how is it that one part of the population is benefiting from the crisis, you know, scoring as contracts with government, again, a manifestation of neoliberalism. Like when you have government awarding businessmen contracts to supply medical equipment, protective gear, and that sort of thing. Like, and then at the same time, you have, as a result of the lockdown, you have people suffering because their livelihoods have been affected. And that was, I mean, that was just the argument that I was trying to put across, like with the song, with trying to show, like, look, in a society that's unequal, in a society with stark economic contradictions, you're bound to find one segment of the population suffering and another one thriving. But I'd also want to see that I seem to think that neoliberal capitalism itself, neoliberal capital has made itself approachable in a very subtle way. Charity. If you look at some of the donations made, and I think we should also be very careful when we're saying, like, some of us have been doing political work in this period. That political work, when you actually, for some of us, like, it has actually been charity for some of us. Like, you've been stepping in to maybe help a community. And when you look at what you have been using to survive, it's still global capital from maybe a local NGO. And then when you now look at some of these companies that have been trying to make themselves approachable, the bidcos and the so on and so forth, that are joined at the hip with the ruling elite, they've also been trying to reinvent themselves. And so that at the end of this period, or at the end when, you know, when the dust settles, they'll be looked at as upstanding businessmen, upstanding companies that were looking out for the less fortunate in this community. And yet the existence of this less fortunate group is as a result of the exploitation of this oppressive class that's trying to make itself approachable. So I think if we are trying to look at our means out of this mess, we have to question our survival. I'll go back to what Gasheke has been asking. We have to look at where are we getting our livelihoods as those of us who are doing organized. How can these communities thrive at times of crisis? I mean, how can they? Survival has to be a question that you have to address, because if you don't address it, then you're just going to find yourself being placated by this group, because at times of vulnerability at this time, you're going to find such businessmen handing out donations and trying to make themselves approachable. So I think if we are asking ourselves how we are going to solve, how we are going to, get rid of this beast called capitalism, survival has to be a quick question that we're answering. And how do we approach that? I think the way our economy is based, cash itself, means that we are always dependent. If you're in a city, for you to survive, you cannot get by without money, like money for rent, money to feed yourself. So how do you deal with that as an issue? How do you think of ways of how do you innovate to live less on a cash economy and then to survive? Then secondly, because survival, we're not looking at survival as an end in and of itself, but once you survive, then how do you keep on waging frontal attacks on capitalism as a beast? So I guess that's all I wanted to say as far as submitting, as far as my submission for this online event. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sana, Comrade Monaja. Comrade Sobukwe, if you'd like to add to the conversation, I'd like to pose a question. What tasks face the people of the world in the struggle against neoliberalism in particular and capitalism in general? So now we know what neoliberalism is all about. And what next? That's the question. What next, Comrade Sobukwe?
Yeah, I think first, and I don't know if I didn't do this at the beginning, but I certainly want to thank the host of this program, RSL, the Thomas Sankara organization, institution, school. I want to thank all of you who have made contributions to this point. I wanted to start by saying I partially agree with Comrade Michael from the Revolutionary Tendency said, but I partially disagree. I think we can acknowledge a crisis and health, and then acknowledge that both the right will use it for its own interest and will use it in certain ways to oppress people, and the left can use it as ways to show the contradictions in capitalism. Because certainly the amount of over 200,000 more people in the US who've died from this disease is worse than most flus that have come through. So I do think that there has been some manifestations of suffering that we must acknowledge for people who have lost family members to this disease. But I do agree, there's a certain, when we talk about moving forward, there is a certain relationship between reform and revolution. On that, we can agree. The question also is for us is to also understand, though, the relationship of the questions of reform in the sense as revolutionaries, we should also be analyzing what kind of reforms lead to power, empowerment of people. of revolution. Like when we see, obviously, we have to fight for all reforms for survival. Obviously, we cannot tell people not to fight for water rights. We cannot tell people not to fight for housing. We cannot, in fact, we should join them and support them. We cannot tell people not to fight for medical, for healthcare, or whatever we call it. So we must encourage and support the people in these struggles. But there are some critical aspects, I think, especially analyzing each situation, because when a revolution, even though we fight together for world revolution, there is some particular realities in particular parts of the world that we have to analyze. When we look at the continent of Africa, one of the real realities of the continent of Africa is that we still are struggling in certain places on the question of this primary, and I think Brother Kasheke may have raised it earlier, on the questions of land. And land is, of course, is a primary resource for survival. We know even now in South Africa, we have still 70% of the economy being controlled by the settler class. No land has, none of the abundance of land in Southern Africa has been returned to the indigenous people. The indigenous people, to a large degree, are landless. The crisis of land, even here, maybe in a place like Kenya, might also be something for discussion. In Namibia, in other places, these struggles for power, the resources, because it's not just the land, but it's also the resources. The fact that in most places in Africa, the mineral resources are controlled from outside. And the laborers who labor in these mines and whatever are underpaid. But they are also of a source that could be organized. As we've seen in, I don't know, I think it was around 2014, 15 when the strikes were taking place in the platinum mines in Southern Africa. It showed that that is a critical force for struggle. Revolutionaries have to analyze all sectors of the society. Those who are very socially marginalized, like the folks in the informal settlements, those who are working in the industrial part of the society, those who are working in the rural areas, those who are landless in the rural areas. And as you know, the informal settlements in some places are certainly not controlled by the masses. They may be occupied by the masses, but they're not controlled by the masses. These are, I think, the kinds of fundamental reforms that are also linked to struggles for power. By linking the reforms that we see to the struggle for power, I think we elevate the people's struggle to a higher level and the revolutionary struggle to a higher level. Once we face, just like when we were facing the question of national liberation on the continent of Africa, we were raising more than just reform, but we're also raising fundamental transformation in the relationship of the means of and modes of production to the people. Of course, we know the national liberation struggles have never been finished on the African continent. There has not been a real revolution on a continental scale in Africa, and imperialism has struggled in every way, including the aspects of aiding reform as to hold on to power. We understand why the Soros Foundation and the other foundations, the Microsoft foundations, and all of these foundations are there. They're there because of our resistance, our level of resistance in the past. So clearly, I think the job of the revolutionary sector at this point is to raise the level of consciousness and to discuss what is the difference between a struggle for survival and a struggle for power. Not, again, discouraging people not to fight for struggles for survival, because we must all, but we have to raise the stakes of understanding of what is a real struggle for power. This even speaks to the question of struggle in the US. And when we look about the folks who are struggling against the police, and but it's not just the police, it's the military industrial complex. It's the whole fact that the trillions of dollars are spent every year on producing weapons while people starve to death in the US. This is a question of understanding the people's relationship to power and what the ruling class actually feels about the masses. And these are the kinds of analytical tools we can help people with. When we join their marches and their struggles and their resistance, we can't just join it as followers. We should also be joining it to increase the struggle. And the last thing I'll add is that we have to look at our struggles as not simply in our own backyards and in our own spaces. That this struggle that is going on the ground in the US in terms of against the military police industrial complex is directly tied to the struggle that's going on here on the continent around AFRICOM, as I mentioned earlier. The question of the militarization of the African continent, the militarization of the police forces, the relationship between the Zionist military regime with the police here in the US and Africa in general. These new pacts that are being made between the Zionists on security information and security hardware, which is going to be used to try to repress the resistance here on the continent and then on a global sense. So I think we have to help people also see the need for greater unity, working unity between the forces of all Africans, of course, and certainly the forces of all revolutionary and oppressed people around the world. And we can see this is not like this is new and rocket science. When we think about the national liberation phase, when we see the assistance that came from Cuba and the assistance to the national liberation struggles that came from different forces in the East, the money that came, the weapons that came, the soldiers that came to help us embark on our national liberation struggles were an act of international solidarity. When we think about the meetings that took place, like in the 60s, Bandung, and then the later meeting that took place in Cuba, where all the liberation forces from Palestine, Asia in general, and Africa and Latin America were meeting to find more and more strategies on how to support each other. We need that kind of continual solidarity. The collapse of the Communist International, or the lack of bringing those kinds of forums and creating the atmosphere for more unity and across the board, more organization across the board, is what we need to be striving for in this period. And thank you. Now I'll stop there.
All right. Thank you very much, Comrade Sobukwe, for that analysis. Comrade Anthony from the Thomas Sankara Political School, if you'd like to add on to what Comrade Sobukwe has said, or any other panelists.
Thank you, Maureen. First of all, I want to say that we have comrades from other countries in this discussion. and it would be unfair to limit the conversation to social justice centers, which are basically reformist organization founded on human rights theory, which is basically a Trojan horse that does not attack the root causes of oppression. So we should take this conversation beyond the social justice centers. So that said, I want to say that the pandemic has really exposed two things. One, it has exposed the rot within the capitalist system. And number two, it has exposed the weaknesses of the left wing, most especially in Kenya. So one, at the onset of the pandemic, the government in Kenya was really strict on the COVID-19 regulations, because they were actively looking for funds, applying for the grants that WHO was issuing to countries that looked like they were going to be hard hit with the pandemic. And now the current situation whereby the government is not currently actively looking for funds relating to COVID-19, we can see they are now relaxing the COVID-19 regulations. So this pandemic has really exposed the rot within the system, because we even saw money that was meant for fighting the pandemic were being looted by government officials and anybody involved in that system. So the system is really a selfish system. And actually, those of us who are involved in maybe trying to help in fighting the pandemic or working within the regulations that were set by the government. I myself, I led a team of researchers trying to research the effects of the socioeconomic effects of the pandemic. And what we were seeing was really pathetic, because we saw the state instruments of violence. In some instances, they were raping the people at night. They were looting the shops of people at night, because now they had imposed a curfew that people are not really able to move at night, or maybe protect the businesses at night. So we saw the instruments of violence coming in to loot from the masses. And number two, within the left, it has exposed the weakness in that we theorize too much. We theorize too much. It is like a competition that I understand Marxism better than you. So it is some sort of academic braggadocio within the left. But there's no really action that is coming from theories. I think it's my comrade Dolunga who said once that what you know is not beneficial to us if you don't put it to action or to practice. So I really think it is time to start acting and stop theorizing too much. I think it is time we sit down and think on how do we seize power in our countries, how do we liberate the working class masses. And the question of sustenance is really an issue that we need to talk about on how we're going to deal with the matter. Because if we don't solve our issue of sustenance, our issue of survival, we run the risk of being, at the end, being lumpenized and being absorbed by this, the capitalists. Because most of us here who are maybe graduates and you're not currently working within the capitalist system and you have no means of survival, there are pressures from within your family itself. There are family expectations on, they expect returns, maybe the money they invested in taking you to school. So we really need to talk about how do we sustain ourselves. And we really need to also strategize beyond the pandemic. So we really need to see how we devise strategies on how we're going to organize the communities, how we're going to organize the youths in our communities, and maybe at some point try and seize power in our respective countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Comrade Anthony from the Thomas Sankara School of Politics. You know, So everyone has, given a great definition of neoliberalism, and we've all talked about abolition and not reform. But who would like to give specific points on how we can abolish neoliberalism, during this pandemic, and how we can fight the system? Like, so we are all talking about how we need to abolish, how we need international solidarity, but how exactly do we go about doing this?
Comrade,
Yes, Maganga.
yes, thank you. First of all, thank you very much to everyone who's given contributions on that particular question. So to answer your question on specifics, I think that it's been mentioned, of course, the need to organize and the tasks that face us as socialists in Kenya, in Africa, in other parts of the world. I think the tactics to use during this period have to correspond naturally to the circumstances that face us during this time. This therefore requires that we agitate and mobilize while organizing and educating at the same time. So we have talked about the issues that have manifested themselves during this period, issues of state repression, issues of healthcare, issues of housing, issues of food, issues of unemployment. These are things that have really clearly manifested themselves during this period as a crisis that has been brought about of neoliberalism and capitalism in general. So our agitation has to take into account these issues while linking them with the mode of production, which is capitalism, basically, and also highlighting how the situation will be if things change, which is exactly what we are trying to work towards. So as we agitate, we tie the issue of the lack of food, the issue of unemployment, the issue of housing with the current system, particularly how this has manifested itself and how things will look like when we enact a new system, a socialist system, a system in which the working class are the ones who are the ruling class in the society. So I think that our agitation during this time has to really take into account these pressing issues. And not to say that it has not been taken into account, but I'm just saying that it needs to emphasize this more. A way, of course, of putting this into practice is to, participate and also organize this protracted people's resistance that we have been talking about against the injustices of the system and against the manifestations of capitalism. Of course, an instance is the People's March, which we had been organizing and which we hopefully shall, keep it moving and burning, which of course, by extension, involved the Sabasaba March. Such issues as were brought out during this march, the issue, the 10-point agenda that we agitated using, the 10-point agenda that highlighted the issue of food and housing and unemployment and all these other issues was a good platform to use agitate to basically try and draw in layers and layers of the working class into the revolutionary space. And of course, as the vanguard, use this to lead to fundamental change in the society. It has, of course, been mentioned the fact that, of course, as we work towards this revolutionary change, we also take into account reforms which naturally would be used in working towards this revolutionary goal, but of course, them not being the end goal. So as we agitate, we shall of course also come into contact with other reformist organizations, but we know that what we are working towards is the revolutionary goal, which involves the revolutionary overhaul of the entire system. So I think that by using this broad platform, which highlights these specific issues that have been facing our people during this period, and basically agitating using these and drawing in layers of the working class into the revolutionary vanguard through showing how the system will be once these issues are solved, would form part of the tactics to be used in agitating during this period. Thank you, comrade.
All right, thank you, Comrade Maganga. I see some of our comrades from the continent have joined in. Muhemsi Mwakihelo, Smangele Luvela, if you could please introduce yourselves. Tembe too, and then we're
Maureen,
about...
I'd like to speak.
Yes, we are about to end the session. So Zarina, you will provide the closing remarks.
Oh.
So Smangele, Tembe, and Muhemsi, because of time, please just introduce yourself and let us know which organization you're representing today.
Hey, can I be heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, my name is Muhemsi Mwakihelo, and I'm representing Tanzania Socialist Forum in Swahili. We call it Jukwaa la Wajamaa Tanzania. Thank you for having me in the forum.
Asante sana.
Can I go?
Hello.
Yes, so good afternoon, comrades. My name is Smangele Luvela. I am based in South Africa, Johannesburg, and I am a collective at the Nkrumah School, which most of you or some of you would know. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So comrades, we have only 18 minutes left for our session to end, and because our comrades in Tanzania didn't get a chance, to let us know of the neoliberalism manifestation in their country, comrades from Tanzania, if you'd like to, just give a 3-minute brief on how neoliberalism has manifested itself in Tanzania, and then we'll have Michael go next for 5 minutes, and then Zarina will provide the closing statement for today's webinar. So comrades from Tanzania, tafadhali, mngependa kutuambia jinsi ukiritimba mambo leo umeweza kumanifest kule Tanzania. Tafadhali, haraka haraka.
Well, first of all, I was not supposed to be the one who was to present anything from our forum, but I would like to speak as a personal experience and stuff. So, neoliberalism in Tanzania, there is no such exceptionality in our country, just like there is no exception. I mean, the situation is similar, like in many countries in Africa. You see it. So I'm very sure that most of the comrades have narrated their experience in their particular countries. So in many ways, I do think that we do share that experiences. So the defragmentation of the working class, you see it, the dissociation of the government to participate in providing social responsibility per se. I mean, the government itself, it's disengaging itself from its core responsibility and stuff. And yeah, these basically those are the main characters that you can quickly see, and largely, I mean, the casualization of the working class and these grand fables like the only way for anyone to get success is for his or her own, how do you quick respond to the opportunities that are given there? It's like the opportunities that are there, then those who are not successful, they are so slow to see those opportunities. So that's the main narrative that is created by the neoliberalism itself. As we know that neoliberalism itself is a fable in its real face. So it's hiding its intention in those stuff like liberty, success, and stuff. So that's a little experience for Tanzania per se. And when it comes to this big crisis like the COVID-19, you see that there is this great denial of the state. Like there's nothing about, I mean, COVID-19 is just a hoax and stuff. So that the government cannot take its full responsibility when those crises come. So that's it. I wasn't prepared for anything. I was just here to listen. By the way, I'm going to my shamba per se, in my field for cultivating. So I was just wanted to get into to see that how are the comrades doing, and I think that I've tried much to say what I have to say for the betterment of the dialogue.
All right. Asante sana. Comrade Smangele, 5 minutes, and then we'll have Comrade Michael and Zarina, and then we close the webinar. So Smangele.
Thank you, comrade. So I came unprepared, but I guess I won't take the full 5 minutes. And I guess with, like the comrade Mohemsi just said, that I think the way that neoliberalism manifests itself in different African countries is similar to every other country in Africa. So with us, I think we have, with this COVID-19, we have seen how the state has used COVID-19 as an opportunity to continue to loot the states. I mean, we have billions of rands that just went missing during this time, which no one can account for, when there are people who are still living in the informal settlements. There are children who still can't access education. I mean, I can name a lot of things. And the other things which we have seen happening during this time is that with the comrades who are staying in the informal settlement, there were a lot of evictions that took place, which I think personally, I'm very close to that subject as someone who is from a social movement that is fighting for the rights of housing. So we have seen a lot of brutality that continues to happen during this pandemic. And also, I think COVID-19 has really shown us how our government and how the capitalist system has failed us in terms of the healthcare in our country. So, like I said, it has really revealed how much the capitalist system has failed in the African continent as a whole, because I'm sure that the things have been, I mean, what we have been experiencing here is similar or even worse in other African countries. So thank you, comrade.
Thank you, Comrade Mangele. We understand the situation in occupied Azania, or as it's called, South Africa, is very dire. So thank you for giving us a clear picture of what is going on there. Solidarity with you and the rest of our fellow Africans in occupied Azania as we struggle with neoliberalism during COVID-19. So, Comrade Michael, you have 5 minutes, and then Zarina Patel. So, Comrade Michael, please.
Yes, well, Comrade Michael has given me the opportunity to speak, so I will speak instead of him. This very last contribution of the meeting today. Before I start on this, I just wanted to thank all of the comrades for their very interesting contributions. It was very important for me to listen to you, and I'm very proud and happy that I have the opportunity to also talk now to you. First of all, comrades, it was raised the fact that so many people are dying in this pandemic, and this is an important fact. And indeed, COVID-19 is not a hoax, it is a severe pandemic, and it's killing people. But comrades, I also want to say that it is not the only pandemic, and it is not the only reason for people dying today. And also not in the United States, by the way. Yes, it is true, 100,000 people have died by COVID in the United States and in many other countries. And we mourn for each and every brother and sister whom we lost during this pandemic. But at the same time, comrades, 480,000 people are dying each and every year in the United States because of the usage of tobacco, because of nicotine, because of cigarettes. 8,000 people are dying because of the consumption of alcohol, because of the side effects of alcoholism. People are dying, billions of people are dying worldwide each and every year because of hunger. Billions are dying because of climate change. Billions are dying because of no access to health, no access to education, and so on and so forth. This pandemic is just another reason. It's just another threat for us. It's just another pandemic in so many other pandemics that are happening, and that are happening since the beginning of the class society, since the beginning of capitalism. Now, I also want to use the opportunity to give an example historically. The young Soviet Union, you know, in the very first years, they had a lot of economic challenges, as you know, and also a lot of health challenges. And one of the biggest health threats at that time was epidemic typhus, which is an illness, a disease that is spread by bugs. And there have been gatherings by hundreds and thousands of workers in St. Petersburg and in Moscow at that time, where the spread of this epidemic typhus was accelerating massively, because hundreds of thousands of people came together. The bug, infected many people. And doctors at the time have thought about saying maybe it would make sense to stop such large gatherings because this bug is spreading so massively. The young Soviet Union was poor. It was very difficult to, treat people with the right health care at the time. But not a second was any revolutionary at the time thinking about saying to the people, stay at home, stay safe, don't connect with each other. To support Bonapartist measures, to support lockdown measures is so wrong, because it is a position of privilege. It is a position of privilege to say, stay at home, because people don't have the chance to stay at home if they need the work, if they need to earn money. We need each other. It is our duty to come together, to mobilize, to organize ourselves. Which brings me to the last point. I think that honestly, to fight against COVID, to fight against the pandemic means to fight against the system as such. Each and every battle that we do today against oppression of women, each and every battle that we do today in the trade unions, each and every battle that we do today for the rights of minorities, and so on. All of these battles are battles against COVID, because the pandemic is the biggest threat in our layers, for the poor, for the workers, and not the biggest threat for the bourgeoisie, not the biggest threat for the rich people, because they have access to healthcare, because they have access to all of this. And if we really want to fight the pandemic, we cannot fight it from home. We have to organize ourselves. So that means agitate, propagandize, organize is what we need on an international level. And that also means to do what comrades in Kenya, in Nigeria, in so many countries are doing already, to rally on the street, to go into the poor villages, to speak with people, to organize them, irrespective of the pandemic, because the pandemic is only our biggest threat if we do what the governments want us to do, if we stay at home, if we stay away from each other, if we don't help each other. No, what we need is to continue our revolutionary work. What we need is to break through the Bonapartist measures. What we need is to break through the lockdowns. What we need is to organize on the streets. This is what we need. Thanks, comrades.
All right. Thank you very much for that passionate plea for us to radically organize all over the world. Thank you. Comrade Zarina, we're about to close the webinar.
Yes, thank you, Maureen. I think the webinar has been extremely enriching on the issue of, on the topic of neoliberalism. We've had a wealth of theoretical concepts put to us by different people. But I am going to respond to the last speaker, as well as comrades Monaja and Anthony, I think, who brought this up particularly. It's particularly from Monaja, there was this plea of how do we put our ideas into practice. Theory is very, very important and absolutely necessary for us to take the right path. But then what exactly on the ground? And it's clear to me that no state-sponsored, donor-sponsored project or intervention is really going to help us, the people, to move forward. We need to organize ourselves, come together and build communities, come together and build solidarity and strength to confront the oppressive system. So in other words, we need workers' councils in the trade unions, we need community centers, we need self-help groups of the aged, the youth, the women, the students, etc., etc., etc. Even health. I remember when in the States, they used to have organizations called Our Bodies, Ourselves, where people, ordinary people just came together and shared their health issues and what has helped them, what kind of remedies are available, both allopathic as well as traditional and others. And in this way, building our own strength. I always give the example of, I live on an estate with 66 houses. And believe it or not, every house, every family does their own thing. So everyone takes their own kids to a school. Everyone builds, every woman has to come home and cook her own dinner and meals, etc., etc., etc. Why on earth can't we get together with 66 houses and provide in the estate a creche for the young kids and the babies, to allow the mothers and the parents to go to work? Why can't we organize a transport system? So many people are going to the same school, but they're going individually. And why can't we run a canteen, for example, where people can come and eat? You can hear me still? Okay. I won't go into it. But this is very possible, and this is what needs to be done. One more thing. I'm coming back to the family. You know, it's interesting how the women issue somehow always gets sidelined, I think, in these kind of discussions. So I really want to end with that again. I want to stress that women's free labor in the family is the kingpin of capitalism. Without that, capitalism simply could not function. No matter how good the robots get, they'll never be able to replace the role of the family and the free labor it gives. So we really need to attend to that. We need to change the structure, the capitalist structure of the family. We have to socialize the family. And to do that, we have to particularly socialize women and liberate them. And so one of the things, or the many things that we can do practically every day, today, amongst ourselves, is look at our own families and look at the kind of relationships that we have in that family. And are we running the family democratically? Are we running the family equally? Or are we putting the burden on one or the other person? Are we running the family authoritatively or democratically, as I said? So please come back and let's talk about that more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Zarina. I agree with you. If we are going to combat neoliberalism, capitalism, it all starts with the family. Comrades, I'd just like to thank you for attending this webinar, Combating Neoliberalism in the Age of COVID-19. We will continue this conversation on our social media pages on the Revolutionary Socialist League on Facebook and Twitter. I'd like to thank the Thomas Sankara School for organizing this webinar and for all panelists for attending. Please follow us on social media where we will continue this conversation. Maganga, if you'd like to close, thank you.
Quick question while Maganga is getting ready. Is there a place where we'll be able to find the recording?
Yes, Comrade Sobukwe. We shall share the recording via email. So yeah, just in a while after this session, we can share the recording via email with the participants of this session. So yes, I'd also like to thank all participants in this webinar today. Special thanks to the moderator, Comrade Maureen Kasaku, who has done a very wonderful job in moderating the session today. Yeah, I think much has already been said. I think that we shall keep having this conversation. We shall definitely have other such engagements, and let's keep organizing and working towards the socialist revolution that we all desire. So yes, I think unless there's any other thing, I think that brings us to the end of the session today.
All right.
Receive revolutionary regards. Yes, Comrade Maureen.
Yes, please everyone message Maganga your email address and you'll be able to receive a post-webinar report and links to all the reading material that Comrade Michael has posted. Thank you.
Bye-bye, comrades. See you. Thank
Bye, comrades.
Bye, comrades.
Bye. We salute you. That was great, Michael.
A luta continua.
A luta continua. That was powerful, everyone, comrades. Aracel.
Yes.
Great work. Simangele. See you, Bolivar. Bye.
Yes, bye, comrades.
All right.
Bye. That was powerful.
Gasheke.
Yes. Bye. See you.
Yeah, please give.
Karonganga.
Please give me a call.
I'll give you a call, Thomas Sankara. I'll give you a call.
Yeah, please give me a call. Yes.
Yeah. Comrades from Bolivar, thank you. Bye.
Lewis.
Vipi bana?
Niaje bana, vipi wewe?
Niko viti mazee kwanza bana.
Niko poa, meeting imekuwa safi.
Imekuwa tu safi, imekuwa sawa.
Yeah.
Bana, acha tuendelee tu kwa organize.
Then tutafanya some post analysis to discuss vitu zingine hapo kiasi.
Yeah. Hiyo itakuwa muhimu.
Okay. Although kidogo sawa, but tutapiga analysis. Naona Ezra ataongea hapo.
Ezra. Ezra, anatusikia kweli?
Hata ni kama hata kuwa lakini sawa. Acha nilikuwa naingia meeting nyingine. Acha after tumemaliza tunaweza piga analysis.
Okay,
sawa.
sawa.